And I'd like to welcome all of our attendees to the webinar today. This is the Dead Ringers monthly webinar for the month of May. And I am Patrick Downey, happy to be your host. Normally I would have my colleague at Dead Ringers, Nikki Wiedemann, along with me, but she is moving this week, so she's busy taking care of that relocation. We do, however, have in the background, we do have Mandy Hungerland, our COO, is Houston Control. And so she's going to be working on your questions and just working on the tech behind the scenes. We've got a great topic today and a couple of points of housekeeping before we dive into that. And as we go through the webinar, if you have questions, we want to hear them. And the way that we're going to accept those questions is you look down at the bottom of the screen and you'll see Q&A. You just press that button. You'll be able to type your questions into the Q&A. And for the last 15 minutes, we've reserved that time to go through questions that you would be entering there. So if it pops into your mind, put it down, type it up, and it'll be, we'll cover it in the last 15 minutes. Also, just want to let everyone know that if you're not familiar with us at Dead Ringers, we're not just a phone shopping company. We do a lot more than that, and I'd like to invite everyone to just go and visit deadringers.co if you would like to know more and learn about all the new things that we're doing, like our CX library and all the new things that we have just rolled out and will continue to roll out to just add a new dimension to how we can serve you. So there you go. Well, let's introduce our guest today. And we are going to be talking with Mr. Darren Crouch. And Darren is the president and CEO of Passages International. And so, Darren, welcome to the webinar. And why don't we just start out? I'd love just to have you just fill the audience in about a little bit about your background and about Passages, please.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me, first of all. I never imagined I'd be in this industry, and I'm guessing many people on this program also didn't, but I actually married into it. My wife's family is in the funeral business, and I came to the United States when I was in my early 20s to do an externship for a hotel management degree that I was doing, and worked at a hotel and met my wife, who was the daughter of the town funeral director. And went back, graduated from my hotel management degree, went to work in hotels and kind of got a little burnt out, and was going back through New Mexico, where she's from. And one of her brothers, who's a licensed funeral director, had started to see a change in the industry. And he had done some initial research into products and branding and that type of thing, and presented the options to me. And I thought it was a great idea. And I often talk to people. I'm also the president of the Green Burial Council, and all the products that we sell at Passages are eco-friendly, biodegradable, sustainably made, certified fair trade, all of those things that are personally important to me as an individual. However, the genesis of Passages really comes out of solving a problem in the funeral home. And the problem that my brother-in-law at that point saw was that he had more and more families coming in, and more of them were selecting cremation, and more of them did not buy an urn. They were not interested in wood, marble, bronze. And the kicker, the real issue that kind of motivated the formation of our company was he was actually meeting with a family that was a personal friend of his. And this friend of his had lost his wife several months earlier to cancer. And he was now meeting with this person again to make funeral arrangements for his two young daughters and mother-in-law that were killed in a tragic car accident. So my brother-in-law goes through the arrangement process. When it comes to that time for his friend to pick a container for his daughters and mother-in-law's remains, he tells him, "I don't want anything," despite having any choice of urns in the selection room. And my brother-in-law was forced to give his very close friend the cremated remains of his two young daughters and mother-in-law in a basic cardboard box back then, which said temporary container on the box. So he's sliding these 3 cardboard boxes across the table. And it just hit him in terms of, why do I go to all this trouble to provide this care and this service, and the last thing these people are going to remember is this cardboard box with the cremated remains of a loved one. So I tell that story, and I'm sure many funeral directors and professionals on this call have had similar stories, but the important thing that I want to convey is that we are a solution company that is providing a solution, and in some cases the solution is to a problem that the funeral professional may not even realize they have. And so we're educating funeral professionals on potential opportunities that they can be taking advantage of that they may not have thought of, because they're knee deep in arrangements, burials, embalmings, everything else that we're doing on a daily basis. So hope that wasn't too much information there.
No, I appreciate that. And, we no doubt have a wide variety of people attending the webinar today from various aspects of the cemetery and funeral service profession. And so the topic of today's webinar is really staying relevant in a changing world. And so I know, Darren, you've kind of been on the cutting edge of trends and change, and you're focused on having memorialization. I mean, you're not in opposition to many of the core tenets of what we do, but you have embraced the trends that are emerging in terms of eco-friendly burial, green burial, and having sustainable products and such. So we talk about being relevant. I know in the cemetery business and just in the funeral business as well, we hear this term a lot because there's a lot of discussion about staying relevant to the changing consumer. And so I just did a quick search online, and I found the term social relevance, and relevance was defined as something that is important or significant to society as a whole, either in terms of its impact or its connection to social issues. So I think all of us in our field of endeavor certainly uh, believe that we're providing something that is very important and has a lot of impact in people's lives when they lose a loved one. So when we talk about this whole topic of relevance, how would you define that today with all the, since 1999 when you started, all the things that you've seen? How do you define that today?
Well, I mean, I think if we boil it down to its basic economic relevance, it's how do we pay the mortgages on our properties and our vehicles? How do we pay our staff in an economic climate where 7 out of 10 families that we serve are going to select cremation, and the majority of those families are going to pay between $1,000 and $4,000 for that transaction, where if we go back 25 years ago, 7 out of 10 families were choosing a burial, and that was a $7,000 to $10,000 transaction. So from a really high lens looking down, the majority of families that walk in the door are spending significantly less. So, we have to really pay attention to what's happening in the industry, and in particular, what the consumer preferences are, and how do we adjust our businesses and the services and the products that we offer to align ourselves with those consumers and provide them with the value that they will ultimately be willing to pay for. Because if we can't create value, then there is not going to be any impetus for them to want to spend any money.
Okay. Why don't we just take a little bit of a deeper dive into that? Because um, I think that the opposite side of the same coin, and we talk about visitation at cemeteries decreasing and other factors that sort of are wrapped around this whole "are we staying relevant" question. And so the opposite side of that coin is irrelevance. And if we are as a business in certain ways increasingly having to be concerned with becoming irrelevant, what kind of causes do you see, or have you seen, or are you still seeing, where professionals in our business might be drifting into irrelevance and either not be aware of it or not know why? Or is it just that we don't want things, we don't want to admit that these changes and these, sort of like cremation years ago, that these new consumer choices are actually going to be strengthening and growing? So how would you speak to that?
Well, I think cremation is a really good example. I mean, I've been in this business long enough to know, and to have heard and gone to conventions where it was being discussed in presentations as to whether or not we should put cremation on our marquee outside the funeral home. So Darren's funeral home and crematory, should I do that? Should I not do that? And all of that was sort of in an effort to, I think in a way, avoid the reality that was coming, which is consumers were asking for it. And I think in a way, the industry did it to themselves in terms of the direct cremation conundrum that we deal with today, which is, people just selecting cremation as a form of disposition. And that came from, I believe, traditional funeral homes saying, well, we don't do that here. Go down the street. I think Bill down the street has a building, a retort, a vehicle, and a cooler. And what you got was cremation in a cardboard box and a black plastic box with a death certificate. And we educated consumers that that's what cremation was, right? And we're trying to walk that back and say, no, no, you can have a service. The only thing that's different is instead of us going to the graveside, we're going to the crematory. Everything else can be the same, right? But we were very slow to adapt to cremation, and that had negative impacts on the industry. And I think the same is true with natural burial. If you look at green burial or natural burial, the consumer preference information is undeniable out there. There is significant data from multiple independent resources that say that there's a significant number of people that want greener options. And if we don't offer those options to people, then we're inviting disruption from outside the industry, say natural organic reduction or something like that. Or we run the risk of them choosing the cheapest option in our businesses.
Well, I think it's really important to bridge over into the discussion of, let's just start with green burial, for example, where the statistic that I saw in researching it was 68% of families today want more information about green burial. Now that's not the same percentage as the actual utilization of green burial, let's say, for the burials that take place in the United States or Canada. But what it really means is, and I've experienced this myself in cemeteries throughout Canada when I was there, across all the four Western provinces anyway. But people were increasingly asking about it and wanting information about it. And so I think that kind of points to what you're saying, that we really have to respond in some way. And we know we want those inquiries, but we really don't want to have to say, well, we don't do that as the standard response. So tell us about some ways that you've seen and you would embrace as far as staying relevant when it comes to being able to answer those questions with options about green burial. And maybe we don't have, uh, there's different shades of green. Let's call it. Maybe you can talk to that a little bit.
Right, sure. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that, it doesn't matter if you look at Kate Boylston surveys or Choice Mutual surveys or NFDA surveys, it is a significant number of consumers that say they're interested and would consider it if it was offered to them. I think what has been challenging over the last several years is that I don't think the industry has been fast enough to adapt to that, and they make families work too hard to get that. So, for example, sometimes if I think about the auto industry, when the Toyota Prius came out, for example, Toyota didn't keep the Prius on the back lot. They put it out front. That's how they sold it, right? But I sometimes I talk to funeral homes, they'll buy a product and then they'll call me and they'll say, well, it hasn't sold. And I'll ask them where it is. Well, it's in my garage or in my back room. It's like, well, no, I mean, you need to get it out there. You need to say that you do green, right? Just like the automakers, they have pickup trucks, they have minivans, they have sports cars, they have flex fuel vehicles, they have hybrid vehicles, they have electric vehicles. And I think the future of the funeral industry is going to be somewhat similar to that. We're going to do burial, and we can do conventional burial or natural burial. We're going to have cremation. We can do flame-based cremation or water-based cremation. If you want to be composted, we have that. And you would have a price for all of those types of things. So when we talk about relevance, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, which is have the options for everyone. When we talk about data, at this point, 85% of people still say they will go to a funeral home to make funeral arrangements. So we have the first bite of the apple. And if we can get an understanding of who the consumer is and what they want, then we can use our professional experience to guide them in the direction that they need to go in order to have the experience they want to have to celebrate the life of that person that they've lost.
I think sometimes cemeteries and funeral homes might might look at sort of a polarizing opinion, where if green burial is over here on the spectrum and it's far apart from the traditional honoring our ceremonies and providing that closure and all the things that we do post funeral, and then on the cemetery side, having really a connection that's tradition to larger monuments, maybe. So I think that cemeteries and funeral homes can maybe take a different perspective when it comes to how you would adapt to these requests. You don't have to necessarily completely change your business model. You can start to implement certain options within your cemetery and certain types of services within your funeral home. One of the things, let me just talk about this for a minute. Green burial and memorialization. A lot of times, I've experienced, for example, families on the cemetery side that really the memorial is very important to them, and they may have other family members that have a particular monument or bronze memorial there. So they look at a green burial option and feel that the memorial is being minimized in that context. So um, what would you advice would you give to families like that in order to, or cemeteries and funeral professionals, to explain it?
Right. Well, I mean, I think, you talked a moment about shades of green, right? And they're like I mentioned earlier that I'm the president of the Green Burial Council, and the Green Burial Council certifies cemeteries, and there's three kinds of cemeteries that can be certified by the Green Burial Council, right? There's a hybrid, there's a natural, and there's a conservation, and that speaks to your kind of shades of green, right? So, if we were to look at a cemetery and talk about a cemetery in response to this data that we talked about, could develop unused land and turn it into a natural cemetery where only green burials could take place. Or if they don't have additional land, and we talk about the shades of green, they could allow vaultless burials or use biodegradable containers in the main section of the conventional cemetery. When it comes to markers, natural burial doesn't preclude the use of markers. Depending on how green you want to go. For example, in a conservation cemetery or a natural cemetery, you might use a natural stone. So a natural piece of locally found stone, whether it's slate or a river rock or something like that. You probably wouldn't want to put a huge granite monument up in a natural cemetery. However, if you were to allow natural burial within your cemetery, you might allow a monument to be placed on a natural burial grave. There's nothing to stop that. So it just really depends on, what the cemetery is comfortable allowing based on the demand in their market and their criteria, and what the family wants.
And in your current sales realm of the products, the whole gamut of products that you offer, what are some of the most popular or seem to be the best selling things that the customer of today is really enjoying and asking for from your business?
Right. Well, I think, I break our business down into kind of three sectors, right? We have products for green burial. When I see green burial, I'm talking about the actual deceased, unembalmed remains of a person. We also have clean burning cremation containers, where we have worked with funeral homes to increase cremation revenues by making a clean burning, sustainable, yet simple container the minimum container for cremation. And then we also work with what are families doing after cremation, if we look at cremation. So, with cremation, consistently over 40% of people say they intend to scatter, um, and probably more ultimately will. And so we have popular products in various different areas, right? So if I were to look at the green burial side of it, I would probably say our seagrass or our willow caskets are the most popular for burial, although many of those get cremated as well. We also have a lot of eco-friendly urns that are very popular, and most of our products are designed for scattering. So, people want to go to the mountain where they skied or hiked, or the beach where they got married. and they want to scatter cremated remains. We do also have some more sustainable products for permanent memorialization or storage. So we have urns made out of, cornstarch that last a long time. We have urns made out of upcycled timber or bamboo that function like conventional urns. They're just made in a more sustainable way. So I think it really depends on, what part of the business we're looking at in terms of popularity. But I can tell you that there's been significant growth, particularly on the caskets for natural burial.
Well, I know also this is something that I think we might want to just jump out for a frame of reference real quick. Let's go over to Europe. I know you have maintained an office in the UK. And what do you see in other countries around the world, and Europe in particular, maybe elsewhere, as far as embracing these trends? Do you see it there as well?
There's definitely a lot more interest. I think in Europe, especially if I use England as an example. I mean, England, well, the United States is like 75 times larger in geographic area to the UK, but England has about the same number of green cemeteries as they are here in the US. And so I think England really led the way in terms of green burial and natural burial. And ironically, I think some of that came out of a need to actually reduce costs. And so, there is an opportunity with natural burial to reduce costs because you don't have to fertilize, you don't have to mow. And I think a lot of the cemeteries in England were municipality owned, and they were looking for a way to reduce costs. And so that's one of the reasons that green burial and green cemeteries became more popular. But yeah, there's between 300 green cemeteries in the UK, and there's probably about that many. I mean, it's growing rapidly here, but there's not that many more here. So I think, Europe in general, I think is a little bit more advanced when it comes to awareness of climate related issues. And so I think that's why they're a little bit further along in terms of products and services offered for that. So like if you went to a convention in England, there'd be a lot more companies that are selling eco-friendly options.
I think it's important. A lot of times, speaking as sort of a guy coming from a traditional service background, let's say, um, we're trying to understand the consumer in terms of the percentage of people that will be really serious about these options as we move into the future. But we are always we being people that have traditional memorialization cemeteries, funeral homes, we're very strong proponents of memorialization, having a permanent place to visit on anniversaries. Mother's Day is one of the most crowded days at the cemetery, Memorial Day coming up, and also having a ceremony, having a visitation. These are all important rituals and aspects of what we espouse. Uh, you're not necessarily opposed to that, and do you see that the consumer that's embracing green burial and eco-friendly trends, they're not necessarily moving away from that, are they?
No, I mean, I think people loved their loved ones as much as they did in the past. They just want to celebrate them and honor them and remember them in slightly different ways. So as you were speaking, I had a couple of images in my mind of what a burial experience might look like. And if I think about a very traditional burial experience that included an embalmed body in a metal casket that got buried in a concrete vault with a monument, and I think about that experience for the family, that tends to be a very um, there's not a lot of participation from the consumer in that experience. They're spectators, right? They're watching the minister give the doing the funeral itself, right? They're just watching, they're spectators. Whereas if you compare that to natural burial, there's a lot more participation. So people might want to spend extra time with the body before the body's removed. So in a conventional scenario, as soon as somebody dies, the removal service might come and take that body away, and the family doesn't see it until 4 days later when it's embalmed and casketed, and they're having a viewing or an open casket. With natural burial, the body could stay there, the family could anoint the body, light candles, listen to music, spend most of the day there, and be more involved, be more present in it. And same thing when it comes to the actual gravesite. They might want to participate more in carrying the body from the coach to the gravesite. They might want to lower the body by hand in a shroud, for example. They may want to help fill the grave. It becomes more of a participation, right? And in some ways, I think the industry has been really educated that, we're helping families by doing everything for them. But in a way, I think by doing everything for them almost robs them of the realization that this person is actually deceased and can hinder the grieving and the healing process. And so I think there is a movement for the consumer to take back a little bit of that. And that doesn't mean that the funeral industry can't participate. They just need to be aware and ask the right questions. How much involvement do you want? What would you like to do versus you would like us to do, right? And the funeral professional, whether it's a cemeterian or the funeral director, is there as a guide in some cases because they know what to do if something doesn't go right. They also have the connections with the cemetery, the clergy, the celebrant, all of those types of things. And so I see moving down the road, the revenue generation for the funeral industry really comes from the service part of it. Yes, there's going to be openings and closings and cost for the grave and those types of things, but really enabling the family to be more involved, I think is really what the consumer on when it comes to green and natural is looking for.
So a big part of this trend is the families just wanting to have more, what can I do, more involvement that's, I guess, hands-on, not in a embalming sense, but
Right.
in being involved in the service. That's a pretty strong characteristic of the new emerging market.
I think so. And I think the other thing is giving people options. Green is not one thing. So, if you're a funeral professional, a funeral director, and the cemetery in your community will not allow a vaultless burial or doesn't have a green section, but there's another cemetery 50 miles away that will do natural burial, give the family that choice. Say, this is what the local cemeteries will permit. These are the costs associated with that. If you want something that's more natural, there are other options for you, and these are the costs for that. And so, we see a lot that, consumers will often make a considerable effort to have this. So, for example, it's not unusual for us at Passages to put a seagrass casket on a plane and send it across the United States. Now, that's not environmentally friendly. Would I prefer not to do it? Yes, I would. But that speaks to the importance of that family having that product. They're willing to um, willing to look beyond the carbon footprint of sending a plane across the country because it's very important for them to have that casket. I've also seen lots of families select embalming, and an embalmed body might go in a willow casket. So when somebody walks in the door, you can't judge what they're going to want, right? They may want a full-on conventional service with embalming, with a religious a bend to it, but they just want a wicker casket. And so I think you have to be open-minded, just like when you go into the selection room in a funeral home. You're not going to have one wood and one metal casket. You're going to have a selection of colors and woods. When you go and you look at conventional urns, you're not just going to have all wood. You're going to have marble, bronze, ceramic. It's important to give choices, and it's important to listen to the consumer in terms of what kind of experience are they looking for to celebrate and honor this person.
Well, I think that is completely valid. I do want to just mention something that we might encounter if we're in the, quote unquote, traditional cemetery or funeral environment with our businesses, which is there seem to be some individuals who take a very almost militant position toward the traditions that we're doing and the prices that we're charging, and so people may immediately put out websites or publications are, don't do that, don't go there, that's just not the way to go, and it's way too much money. So we don't need to be opposed or at war with one another between eco-friendly green burial versus regular funeral home and cemetery options, do we?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, the irony is in the non-consumer, in the non-funeral space, if you were to go and buy something organic or natural anywhere else, whether it's organic produce, concentrated liquid detergent, fluorescent light bulbs, all of those more natural things, electric cars, solar panels, you're going to pay a premium for those eco-friendly options, right? There is an opportunity to talk about things like willow caskets being certified fair trade and there being a bigger picture to the purchase of this product. And I talked a little bit earlier about value, right? We have to be able to communicate the value of what we as funeral professionals do, whether it's a funeral director or a cemetery. And if we can create that value and convey that value, then it's more likely that people will pay for it. So, for example, if I go back to the bamboo cremation container that I talked about and cremation, when you cremate people's loved ones in cardboard boxes and you give them a black plastic box at the end of it, there's very little tangible value. When you cremate people's loved ones in a bamboo container that burns clean, has a low carbon footprint, is made fair trade, is made from a renewable resource, those are words that consumers understand and are willing to pay for because they pay for it with their coffee, they pay for it with their chocolate. It adds value, right? And so there is an opportunity with the funeral industry and green to really talk about the big picture here, which is sustainability, renewability, and the value of that, right? And so we have case studies where funeral homes, for example, have eliminated cardboard cremation containers and they only use bamboo. That bamboo container is $600 as opposed to a $195 cardboard box. They've raised their revenues on cremation by an average of 30% per family. Their customer satisfaction has gone up. And so you have this perfect scenario where you're earning more money, you have a customer that's happy, and you're also being greener because you're not putting toxic chemicals into the environment by burning something that doesn't burn clean.
Well, I think this is really revealing and significant because there's no doubt that the percentage of families, based on many of the things you just mentioned, Darren, that are going to call in when they're perhaps checking on prices and maybe at the time of need, even perhaps where they want to ask about these things and know that whether they're available or not. So 68% of a market and rising is nothing to ignore. And I think in back to the topic of our webinar, to how to stay relevant. All I have to do really is just talk about a company like Blockbuster Video, where technology sort of disrupted and completely eclipsed that business. And of course, we all maybe grew up on taking yellow cab, and then Uber came along and totally disrupted that scenario. So I think that we have to expect that there will be continued market strength in this area, and whether it's a disruption or not, we don't have to make it so. We can respond, and we can do things. How about another area, Darren, where I know you have products from your company, but this is a across the world. My statistic was almost 2 billion with a B dollars in market value consumption of products last year in 2024 and growing at almost 11%. And that is the pet memorial area. So, what do you see with that?
Well, the pet industry is definitely a huge opportunity, I think. There's definitely some factors that you need to consider, though. I mean, the vast majority of deaths that occur for pets are associated with vets as well. So a lot of pets are euthanized. And so, trying to figure out and navigate, where does the memorialization and the funeral industry come into that in relation to vets? So, I know the vets, for example, some vets are starting to get into the memorialization industry and have crematories and alkali hydrolysis machines. But I think for the most part, vets don't want to be seen to profit one way or the other, whether they do a surgery on your animal or whether they euthanize and cremate your animal. But I do think, the old joke is that people will spend more on their pet than they will on their parent, and so there's definitely a huge opportunity there. And so for us, we deal with both pet crematories that have contracts with vets because that's where the volume is. But we also deal with, uh, businesses that have started up to deal with funerals for pets as well. So I would
Um,
definitely advise anyone that's not in it to explore getting into it for sure.
well, we Mandy just flashed up a survey that we did during the call here, Darren, and it was came back at 55% of our audience today does not currently offer green or eco-friendly options. So that's an interesting statistic. So uh, let me just see if you can be sort of a prognosticator here for a minute about the future. We're all interested in just trying to get a handle on, we know we have this high inquiry rate, but we may have a much lower actual burial rate, but that's not necessarily something that we should have security or, in. So, where do you see 5 years out, maybe even 10 years out? You've been right in the middle on the cutting edge of this since 1999. So where do you see the cemeteries of the future and the funeral homes of the future different from where they are today?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. I think there is an opportunity to remain somewhat similar. And what I mean by that, I'm going to kind of put a caveat in there. As you were talking and describing, as I think about that survey, what really came to mind to me was that it's not that hard to do green. You know, funeral homes and cemeteries already know how to care for a deceased individual. They know how to bury a body in the ground. And so I think there's this knowledge gap because a lot of this stuff is not taught in mortuary school, but there's a nervousness I feel that funeral professionals don't know what to do if a family comes in and wants a green burial. What do we do if there was leakage in a casket that is not sealed? What do we do if we dig a grave and we don't use a liner or it starts to fill up with water? There's all these what ifs, and I think there's a nervousness, and it's completely understandable. If you are new to something and you haven't done very many of them, then there's a nervousness to make sure you don't drop the ball or make a mistake. But I would encourage funeral professionals to look at it as an opportunity and not a threat. I think it's only a threat is if you ignore it and bury your head in the sand. But in terms of getting ready or thinking about 5 years from the future, get some products in there that can be used for burial, for clean cremation, for scattering, for biodegradable burial, for water burial, and have them on display and educate your staff about them, and be aware of what type of consumer might want this product and how it'll benefit them and how it'll benefit your business. On the cemetery side, if you have excess land that is suitable for developing into a green section or a natural burial section, then explore doing it. If you have the ability to allow natural burial anywhere in your existing cemetery, and there are models for that, look into that as well. I mean, I've heard from, a good model for me is a cemetery up in Portland, Oregon called Riverside Cemetery that has some of the founding fathers of Portland buried in that cemetery, and they'll do natural burial anywhere in the cemetery. Um, and they explain what is necessary prior to burial and after burial, and they'll do it anywhere. And they find that 30% of their burials are natural burials. What they're also finding is they're actually converting direct cremation families into burial families. And so for me, I really see an environment where, when burials are projected to go down, I mean, I think by the NFDA is projecting by 2045 that only 13 to 14% of people will bury, 82% of people will cremate. So for those cemeteries out there, how do we get people to engage with us and buy plots, right? And bury people in those cemeteries. And I think natural burial is a relatively easy way to do that. Judging by the numbers, there's a lot of demand for it.
Well, I think we've had some pretty good points here today, Darren, where, we have to, it's better to evolve than to try to suddenly metamorphosize yourself into a different business when it may be, in fact, too late to go back and reclaim that. So families will still find significance in the ceremonies that we plan for them and in how the funeral director aids a family in working through all those details and bringing order out of chaos and helping them grieve by offering additional post service resources to them. And cemeteries will always be a place where it's important to have I think a place, but that place, like you said, could be more and more people are saying, well, that's the lake that Dad fished at every year, and That's the beach where we went to vacation. So I think that your point to be open, it's not necessarily a threat. It's an opportunity to be creative and look at ways within our cemetery. But the real thing that I was important that you said is how do we answer the question that we know we're going to get increasingly when a family asks, "What do you have in the way of green? Do you have green burial, or what do you have?" I think we all need to be prepared how to answer that. And sometimes it's just engaging with the family and asking them what type of a burial seems the best burial, that what did you have in mind there, that type of thing. So
Right. And I
engage
think
with
also
that. And
for, yeah, I mean, if we look at scattering, it's kind of the same thing. If we know that there's a significant number of people that say they want to scatter and we're a cemetery, how do we give them what they want, but also generate the revenue that we need as a business? So, for example, it might be okay, well, if you're going to scatter, why don't we split the remains and you take a portion and you scatter at the lake house, on the beach where you were married, where he served in Normandy, whatever. But let's also keep a portion here and inter them at cemetery and put a plaque. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? We don't have to have this mentality that it's a threat and we need to talk people out of it. There's a way to accommodate everything, I think, if we're really smart about it, because people do want to have a place to go back to. People do want to remember and honor and celebrate that person, but we need to be open to the new ways of doing it.
I think before we go to questions here, and if you're out there and you got a question, now would be a great time. I'm getting some things in the chat here, so we'll move to that in just a moment. But one of the things that I don't want to leave out of our discussion is technology when it comes to memorialization. And I noted that your many of your products, as cemeteries are embracing this as well, contain a QR code or a barcode that can be scanned that will immediately take you to a map of where someone may have scattered their loved one's remains all over the globe. There's a geo pin point that you can click on, and it opens up a media portal where you can have a whole story of the person's life. Can you just explain that?
Sure. Well, I mean, we when I think of a cemetery, I think of a community of deceased and buried individuals where I can walk to a particular location in that cemetery, see who's buried there, pay respects. And with the data around scattering, and I told you that over 40% of people consistently say they want to scatter, there's no way to either log where that person is scattered, or memorialize that person in many ways. And so what we created is the ability for every person using a passages urn to geolocate exactly where they scattered or buried the cremated remains of a loved one, and then create an online memorial that includes the ways they celebrated that individual, who that individual was, upload up to 8 photos, and then of course put the pin on the map. And so we see it as a digital community of people that have been scattered, just like a cemetery is a physical community of people that have been buried. And one of the examples that I use is I was in Ireland last summer, and I was at a beautiful spot in Donegal on the beach, and on the rocks someone had put a plaque. Obviously it was someone special that used to like to come to that place that passed away. And I thought to myself, well, that's really beautiful. But if 50 people do that over the next 50 years, if I were to come back to this spot, that won't be as beautiful. It'll be just plaques everywhere, right? And so we want to be able to mark the spot, but we want to do it in a digital way that's not invasive in terms of, and in some places you can't do it, right? You can't do it in the middle of the ocean where someone scattered off a cruise ship. You can't do it on a beach. So that's been really popular for us, and it's been very well received.
Well, technology and AI and all of these things will definitely also come into play with families in terms of creativity and opportunities again, not necessarily a threat. So, if you have questions, please place them into the Q&A for Darren. Now's your opportunity to ask. I think our purpose today really, Darren is coming from a very unique perspective. So 26 years of looking at these type of sustainable and this trend moving along the timeline and growing and becoming significant. And my background is pretty much rooted in the, what you might say the traditional cemetery funeral traditions, which have very important and significant aspects to help families from which they originated through the years. And so I think that if we can do anything for everyone that's viewing today, it's to figure out how you might be able to mesh these things together in your business to embrace what's coming and stay relevant by working into some of these options and knowing how to answer those questions because they're not going to go away. And most indications are that they're increasing. And so I think it's important for us to be on the forefront of that. So, Darren, before we go to any questions here, any just final messages for everyone?
Yeah, I would say, be courageous. I understand that a lot of people haven't learned about this in mortuary school, and a lot of the products, they feel different, they look different, they function differently. Um, but yeah, I would say, be brave, look at different ideas, embrace different options, and I think you'll be surprised at the reception you get from these products and services from the families that you serve.
And I just had a question here, so I'll make sure you can answer it. But if anyone wants to talk with you further or reach out to you, what's the best place for them to do that, Darren?
I think the best thing to do is email me. My email is Darren, Darren, at passagesinternational.com. They can also call our office at 505-830-2500. I'd be happy to chat with anyone.
All right. How about some questions? I don't know, Mandy, if we have any questions coming in or not, but now is a great opportunity for you to do that. So I'll just look at our Q&A board here and see what we might have. Not seeing too many coming in, not on the chat. Let me just check that. So, uh, no, I don't see any more. So we still have a few minutes. So if everyone wants to hang on for a minute, I think I wanted to ask, and this is something you touched on before, Darren, where sometimes a cemetery or a funeral home business might think that, part of the eco-friendly and part of the green burial movement is all something that's just about low cost and about minimizing expenditures. And yes, it's less expensive in many cases to choose these options over traditional options. But there are many cases where a green burial cemetery or a green burial service option is placed out there well within the pricing strategy or the pricing mix of a general price list, and people embrace it and are they're happy to pay those prices that the cemetery and funeral home might make available because the value is there. Would you comment on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think the value is a key component of it. Yeah, green doesn't have to be cheap. I mean, it can be just like a conventional burial or a cremation can be cheap. It really just depends on what the consumer is going to pick. But, when I think about some of the casket products that, we have, some of them would retail from, $2,500 to $4,000. I mean, it's not going to be the same as a mahogany or a bronze or a copper casket, but it's going to be significantly more than a direct cremation. And so I think that you need to be careful what you compare it to. I'm not sure, that the days of a bronze or a copper casket are going to come back anytime soon. They might, we never know what the cycles are going to be. But it is important to know that, I know there are caskets out there that a family might buy for $1,000. And so green doesn't have to be cheap. And I think it's important that you find ways to convey value and communicate value so that people really understand what they're getting. It always kind of surprises me and it disappoints me that the funeral industry historically seems to have trouble conveying that value. When I think about, my father-in-law, my brother-in-law is getting up in the middle of the night, working late, I wouldn't get my attorney or my accountant up in the middle of the night if I had a question, but the funeral director can be called and gets up in the middle of the night. And so I think, there's a real value to funeral service that hasn't been communicated as effectively as it could be. And I think of the converse of that, which I think we also mistakenly assume that the consumer won't spend any money. And I'll give you an example of that. I have a brother-in-law who lost his mother, and he's the wife. His wife is the sister of my wife who grew up in a funeral home, and he was calling a funeral home to ask the questions about what to do with his mother. And the funeral home, the first thing they told him about was the price. And he was really wanting to know, what do I do? My mother has passed away. What do I do? And so there's this jump to immediately assume that the consumer won't pay. They want the cheapest price. When I think really the consumer, first and foremost, wants to know, how can you help me? I have this issue that I need help with. And if you can, um, get them to engage with you and trust you and provide the information that you need, it doesn't have to be about price. And I think that's one of the things that we as an industry have gotten a little bit wrong, where we assume everyone is price sensitive.
Well, I really want to thank you for joining us. And, you know, there's a lot more common denominator here. And this was one of the things that we're so glad to have Darren on and just talk about what those are. We're still in the business of bringing significance. That's the opposite of irrelevance and personalization and significance. We're the same in that regard. That's our duty to the families that we serve, and to be able to listen to them and hear what we can craft to make their experience of losing their loved one personal, meaningful, and significant to them, because they'll remember that day for the rest of their lives. So we can't afford to ignore a large voice in the marketplace that's saying, we'd like to know about this and what can you do there? So I think it's important that we all learn how to respond to that. Hopefully we've given you some food for thought here today. And, Darren, having your perspective of the last 26 years of just, you're surfing the change wave out there and happy to be doing it, and really bringing some great perspective and information. I think it will play into all of our futures. So let me, there's no questions. I'm just going to thank everyone. And I also want to mention that the Darren has a recorded session module. We now have what's called our Dead Ringers CXpertise Library, and you can go to our website to find out more about how to have access to that and some of the services that we do. I mean, in a word, what we believe in: what gets measured gets improved, and so we offer a very well designed and robust way just to measure the basics, of course, of how your frontline people are engaging with customers, and have a look at that yourself through our services. But we also do now the CX Library, which is learning, training, meetings that you can facilitate. And if you want to get a little more from Darren on his expertise, you can go there and just visit the website. You can go to ours at, once again, deadringers.co, or passagesinternational.com, right, Darren?
That's correct. Yep.
All right. Well, that's we're just about at our time here, and I would want to thank everybody for joining us. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next month. We'll be sending out emails on our topic for the month of June. So take care, and thank you, everyone. See you next time. Thanks,
Thank
Darren.
you. Thank you.